What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the Planet Soccer channel here on YouTube. I'm Reed, that's Dylan, and today we are continuing our conversation on the global game from two Americans' perspective. We don't speak for all Americans, we speak for ourselves, but we have a pretty general understanding of relatively knowledgeable Americans on soccer looking at the global game. So I'd say we're qualified to speak on it. Dylan, last week we had a conversation with Travis Levinson over in England, and we broke down the English football pyramid. And one thing I loved that he said is that, like right off the bat, almost instinctual, is that it's infinite. And that was just such a great way for him to put it. I was hoping he would say that without realizing I was hoping he would say that, because it led into a great conversation. But it's also going to lead into 3 or 4 additional conversations between you and I in the form of individual episodes, breaking down different aspects of what we talked about with Travis. And today that's going to be player career progression. How do you get from 4-year-old just starting out, 5-year-old, 6-year-old just starting out playing the sport to the Premier League? And then we'll relate it back to how does a 4-year-old starting baseball or 5-year-old starting baseball make it to Major League Baseball, things like that. It's not really something I thought about a lot as a soccer fan, just because I've been so focused on tactics. You've been so focused on business.
Right.
We don't really worry about what happens before the players get to that stage. But what was your kind of feeling? Did you ever think about it? Was it something that ever crossed your mind before we talked to Travis about it?
Honestly, being a Newcastle fan, no, because our academy has
Not
been
known
so
for the academy?
stagnant. Yeah, so stagnant, especially compared to the Chelseas of the world or the Man Cities of the world now.
Ours is just really
super...
nice. The building is really nice, so that's the only reason I ever hear about it. But
our
we
building
have
is
some good players in the
not
academy now.
nice. But yeah, no, as a Newcastle fan, like Lewis Miley is kind of an outlier for us. We're not known for our academy products by any means. So it's not something I put a lot of thought into. But as we started researching it, there were a lot of questions that kind of came to my mind, especially about the younger side of the player development and the differences in American sports. But yeah, as a Newcastle fan, academies were like, it's kind of been something that's like, oh my God, I wish we had an academy. I wish we were like a top tier academy, and we're just not. So it wasn't something that crossed my mind very frequently, but it was something that as I dove more into that episode and the prep for that episode, started to have a lot of questions start to come up.
Yeah. I think basically what it comes down to, and this will lead us into the episode, the meat of it, but the English pyramid itself, it is fluid. But for me, it's like you can get under the umbrella of a professional club as an 8, 9, 10-year-old. And in American sports, it's structured. It's fluid. It's not as fluid progression, I should say. And you can't skip any of the steps I feel like you can in soccer. Like you can go to that club. You have to go the grassroots, the travel ball, the high school, the college. In most instances, it varies a little bit sport to sport, but those were the two main differences for me. Let's talk about the American way first. Let's stay at home and talk about the different sports, and then we'll go into England and follow up on that with talking about England and then Europe as a whole. The career path in American sports, like we just said, it's defined and it's fixed in nature. You can't change it. It's always been that way. The NBA's made a few tweaks. The NFL's changed the age where you can enter the draft out of college, but by and large, there's not many steps you can skip, regardless of which one you look at. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think baseball and hockey are kind of outliers here, where you can get drafted essentially out of high school and go right into the professional levels. But it's a minor league professional level in a lot of instances. Like you can get
and
drafted
that's still at
out of high
18
school.
years old.
Right,
17 within a certain range of your 18th birthday.
Right, yeah, you can get drafted, but then you're going to go play minor league ball, or you're going to go play juniors in hockey, and you're owned in hockey by a parent club, or even in baseball, and you kind of
can you go a little bit more into hockey, because that's something I'm not super familiar with. I feel like it might honestly be the best.
It's probably it's probably the closest comparison we have. So in hockey, typically you're not getting, well, you can't get drafted until you're 18, but even once you get drafted, you're either going to college as a drafted player,
Mhm.
and getting to play while you're in
And
college,
your
but owned
rights
by a
remain
parent club.
owned
Yeah.
by that.
Yep.
Interesting.
Or
Okay.
you're playing junior hockey out of high school, and you go play in the OHL or the WHL, and then get drafted at 19 or 20, and then work. You're still, like I said, you're still owned by a parent club or an NHL franchise. But there is a little bit more fluid movement there because you can
Mhm.
move around in juniors a little bit, and that's almost like the loan system in a way. Like, hey, we know
Yeah.
we want you in our organization. You're going to come to training camp with us and train with the big boys, in the off season. But then we're
Learn
going to
the
ship you
culture
off.
of our franchise and how
Right,
we
exactly.
play and things like that. Yeah.
But then you're going to get shipped off to the OHL and go play a year or two in juniors, and get a little bit more exposure and minutes is kind of the big thing. Just like in soccer, like you don't want to have an 18-year-old that isn't quite ready for the NHL, so you're playing on the fourth line. You would rather your 18-year-old going and being a first liner in the OHL
Yeah.
and getting 20-25 minutes a night on the
Meaningful
ice.
minutes. Meaningful
Right,
minutes.
exactly.
Meaningful.
Where
It's a
where you're
buzzword in
you are
sports.
you're the go-to goal scorer, especially forwards. Like you're a go-to goal scorer on that team, and you see that a lot
Yeah.
in soccer too, where
Those
you know
confidence
we
positions.
saw it with Balogun. To bring it back to American a little bit, Arsenal owned his rights. They liked what they saw in him, and they signed him young, but then they loaned him out last year to the French league, and he blew up, and he was able to get meaningful minutes in a far lesser, as you said this morning, while watching a Ligue 1 game, like far,
His
far
team,
lesser,
actually.
far lesser league. But he
Yeah.
was able to get starting minutes in that league and be the go-to goal scorer and have a great season. And it didn't work out for him at Arsenal, so they ended up selling him. And that's not something you frequently see in American sports, where oh, we don't really have first line minutes for you in the NHL, so we're gonna sell you to a Swedish team or trade you to a
Yeah.
Swedish team. So that's where it does kind of differ.
You
And
also
that's
just
where it
can't
is a
straight up
bit more
sell your
fluid.
players. Like it has to be via trade. I mean, you can do like
Right.
cash considerations, but that's something that we didn't even talk about with him that I think is very key in all this is there can be just an outright, all right, he's
Shipping you
not going to be
away.
ready in time for our timeline. Give us 10 million euros or
and that
pounds or
and that's
whatever.
and that's where it is so much more fluid than American or North
Yeah.
American sports,
I
because
think
the
to give you that, oh, go ahead.
closest comparison being hockey. Like you still have that parent club. There's only 30 teams, 32
Mhm.
teams, and if you aren't ready, then your career just kind of ends, or you have to go play in Europe and your career is over. Where in English soccer, if you're not ready, you'll go play in the championship. You'll go play in France, and then you still have a chance to then go
Yeah.
make it to the big leagues, if you will, of the Premier League or the Bundesliga or La Liga or whatever league you're owned by. You still have a chance to come back to that. So you do have a little bit more late career progression possibilities, where you can be 25, 26, never played in the Premier League yet, and then still have a chance to make it. In American sports, if you haven't made it by 26, 27, you're probably not going to make it to that top tier. And that's where it is a lot
Yeah.
different. And there's a lot more opportunity in European soccer.
Yeah. I think if you sandwiched together baseball and hockey, that's probably you got hockey with the pseudo loan system and then baseball with like the under the pyramid within the MLB franchise, your AAA, single A, double A, and then rookie, and you got your international leagues and things like that. But there is no one direct comparison. The thing that really got me started transitioning now to England, thinking about this is we are planning on interviewing a former Tottenham Academy player on our Lily White Lounge, and it's like, man, that's something I've never really thought about. Like those kids that signed at 8, do they still go to school? Like just basic questions like that, and that was furthered when me and the rest of America watched the Beckham documentary. And I knew that Beckham was considered a prodigy and that prodigies like that will get signed. But it's more than just prodigies. Like if you show promise and development and technical ability at that age, like they're going to swoop you up and get you in their system, and get you under their umbrella. And you would think that if you're under their control, they basically control your life for your formative years and beyond. Like there's a buffer zone, but between the formative years that they control you, you think the success rate would be a little higher than it is, but there's still, just like American sports, that just 1% that makes it, especially taking into consideration that England is the one, or I'm sorry, football or soccer is the one and only sport in England that, you know, you've got rugby and cricket, but like the premier sport, it is soccer, it is football. So everybody's trying to play it, which makes a little more sense considering it is only the top 1% that does, because you're competing with your whole country. What's the first question when you started looking at this that stood out to you, Dylan? I know you mentioned
Just
the commitment, and then what happens when it doesn't work out, I think is what
just
you had.
kind of just the importance of being discovered at that 8 to
Mhm.
12-year-old range. And like it's kind of wild to me because so much, even just physically and mentally, changes in those 8 to 18-year-old, that time of your life. Like how, like
Yeah.
the thought of having to identify athletes at 10, 11, or 12. Like if I'm thinking about 10 or 11, 10, 11, 12 in American sports, like it's useless. Like it's
Yeah.
very few and far between. Like the whole baby Gronk thing, like he was marketed as like by his dad, and that's a whole nother crazy topic for
Hmm.
American sports. But like that is so uncommon, seeing people try to commit to universities at age 10, 11, or 12 for just collegiate athletics. And now we're
Yeah.
talking in England, you're committing to a professional club at that age. That talent identification is wild to me, and the importance of it, because how easy is it, or inverse, how difficult is it to make it if you aren't identified at that age? And he had some really good
Very
examples.
hard
And
is what
yeah,
we
he
learned.
had some
Very
he had
hard.
some very good examples, and he had like two very good
Right,
examples. The
right
one that kind
away.
of sticks out to me the most is Jamie Vardy. And if you're an EPL fan, you are familiar with his story, and how late he kind of bloomed. But in American sports, like that's normal. That's like the norm. Like our starting goalkeeper for the U.S. didn't play soccer until he was 17. And in England, it's like if you haven't started to play soccer by 17, like your career's over. Like there's no
Yeah.
like picking it up late there, because that talent
Travis
identification
said it
is
does
so
end at
young.
18. Like if you're not within the pyramid by 18, like that's when it stops.
Right.
Um,
And really, if you're not in the pyramid by 12, your chances are drastically
yeah,
cut.
to make it to the top, it
Not even
pretty
cut in
much goes
half.
down to
Like,
zero.
yeah, yeah, exactly. You're talking like 1% of players, and Jamie Vardy, like I said,
The
was really
outliers.
my favorite example. But
Hmm.
it is an outlier, and that importance of getting in young is just so crazy. And I
Yeah.
think the kind of questions you have going into that interview for Lily White is super valid. Like, what happens to those players? Like, I'm thinking
Where
if
do they
I
live? Do they go to school? Like, what are their
right,
friends? Do they have friends outside of the club? Like, do they have a social life? It's all the
right, or
basic like childhood questions, which
right,
when you think about
and
it, that becomes like, whoa, you know?
right. Like I can't imagine. And we've seen Americans in this scenario get shipped off to Europe at age 10, 11, or 12 because they have to if they're going to make it. And like the
Yeah.
thought of that as an American, like as a future parent, like the thought of shipping my kid off to not at home with me to play a
Hmm.
sport that they may or may not make it in is wild, but you have to do that in European soccer. And that is probably
Yeah.
the craziest
We
concept to
actually
me
have
in player development.
there's a really good story that we'll wrap up with, that's talking about sending your kid off and hoping that he becomes something. But it is a crazy concept. And if you think about it, like we are close to being parents. And so we start thinking about more things from that perspective. And it's wild. I mean, England's a small country. You can drive coast to coast in 4 hours, 5 hours probably. But when we start talking about oceans, that's when it gets really interesting, which is what it would be for us sending our kids to England.
Or even in
Um,
the American
yeah.
system, as we're developing our youth development, we're now planning on this academy essentially based out of Atlanta. And we're talking, if you're a Southern California kid, like do I have to move to Atlanta, which is a 3-4 hour flight from my hometown? Flight,
Mhm.
not 3 or 4 hour drive. And like you're that far away from your parents, but you're still in the same country.
Yeah.
That's where I think America's at a huge disadvantage as far as player development goes. Is that's a lot harder for a parent to want their child to move that far away to pursue an athletic career at that age, where you're missing out on that the neighborhood atmosphere, going trick or treating and
Mhm.
having friends that you're just shooting hoops with or playing soccer in the backyard. Like you lose that if you do that. And when
Yeah.
you're 4 or 5 hours away from your elementary school friends at age 12, like that's a major change. But
Yeah,
it's just kind of
our
the
friend
norm in
groups
England.
were molded by our sporting experience, or molded around our sporting experiences, not molded by our sporting experiences. Um, which it sounds to me like if you get within that club at 8, your best friends are going to be in that club, and you're going to. I still haven't gotten an answer on the school thing, like what the school, what the regulations are. Do they have to pass any sort of criteria tests to make sure they're keeping up? Um, that's a deeper dive than we're going to go into in this episode, but that lends to what you were talking about with when it stops and you're not in that 1%, like how screwed are you? A lot of times in American sports, it's a choice. Like we talked about baseball. No, I'm just going to keep playing. Like my wife's an anesthesiologist or something, and I can afford to take those 10-hour bus rides and just do what I love. Good on you. That doesn't sound like my ideal life, but people do it, and they know they're never going to make it to the big leagues. However,
But again, that's a choice you're making at 18, 19, 20, not a choice you're
exactly,
making at
exactly,
12. And that's
yeah,
that's
and you're
where
making
it's
with
such a
your
foreign
wife, and
concept to me.
yeah, yep, exactly. Um, we can't just talk about England in this episode. Because it's all intertwined. Academies don't just um, actually, I could be wrong on this. Are academies just within that country? Can you just have English players in your academy? You can, or you have to. Anyways, ignore what I said. It's different for other countries, and I think you have to look at what England represents, kind of characteristically with soccer. It's physical. You have to be bigger center backs, taller strikers, more of the classical players, and it kind of goes back to what you were talking about at age 10. You don't know. I mean, you can look at the parents and kind of project, but you don't know if their brain's gonna develop at the same rate as their body, or their dexterity is gonna ever match the length of their limbs, things like that. So technical and tactical development becomes so significant, and you see it. We've seen it a lot in France. Not the best league, but they have an excellent central country academy, and they've had great success, obviously, with developing some of the best players ever. Um, the role of the academies in development, Dylan, and let's look beyond England in this for a minute. And um, what do you think the goal of it is? Is it to max? It's obviously not to maximize profits. Are you trying to Portugal? Portugal. Break that down for me. Will you? I feel like I've been talking.
Yeah,
I
no,
feel like you know
I
where to go.
I do think it is super unique in that where you are picked up in an academy, especially um, if you are from a country who doesn't have a very high end academy. If you're in an African nation, or if you're in a North
Underdeveloped nation.
American,
Let's just.
or
I mean, let's
or
just say
or
it.
even
It's
or even like a North America, like a very
yeah.
developed countries, but not very developed in soccer. So you kind of have to choose where you're going to go. And it
Mhm.
does have a huge role on the player you will become. Like there are very stereotypical outcomes from where you choose to to be trained. In England, it's
Yeah.
going to be very physical. In Germany, it's going to be very tactical and very pass heavy. In Spain, it's going to be a little bit more flair, and same with Portugal. It's going to be a little more flair and more of those skill based um, focuses. And France is kind of because of that
Italy's
centralized.
knowledge, tactical
Yeah,
knowledge,
Italy's
discipline.
all all ball knowledge, and France is kind of all encompassing of all of it. And I think that's why France has had such success on the international scale, is because they take bits and pieces of everything. So it is super important where you are in the academy, and what type of academy system you're in. And even within England or within a certain country, different academies are known for different things. Like Chelsea is very, as much as I hate Chelsea, they are very good at
They go get
creating
them.
tech.
They
They go get the elite players, and then they kind of refine their tactical abilities. You look at a Watford, and a very scoring heavy type of academy. So it is very different from academy to academy on what they're focusing on. And at the end of the day, it's what they want their, first team to embody is built out through that academy. So it is
Mhm.
super important where you are, what academy you're at. And that's another thing, again, like you said, at 10, 11, 12, how do I know what player I'm going to be when I'm an adult? Like, you don't really
Yeah.
know, but it molds you quite a bit, based on the academy you're in. And that's another kind of unique thing. Like, you kind of get that a little bit in baseball, but not to the extent you get it in others. Like,
Yeah,
there
like
are certain
Rays are known for
organizations.
pitching,
Yeah,
developing their
exactly. Like
pitchers. Yeah. Red Sox, their
Pirates.
hitters.
Pirates do a really good job developing pitchers as well, but not to the extent where it is so meticulous in as it is in European soccer. And I keep coming back to England on this a little bit, and how different all of those academies are, and the type of players they try and develop, and
Mhm.
having to identify what player you want to be at 18, and getting in the right academy at 10, 11, 12 is pretty remarkable. And sometimes it's just a regional thing too. Sometimes you will just get
Yeah.
picked up by your um, local big club and be in their academy, and then that's going to shape the player you become. And that's a pretty unique aspect, is the regionality of it. And you get very different players, based off
Mhm.
of where they grew up and the academy they go to because of where they grew up. And it's a
Yeah.
pretty unique and pretty, like, I feel like we could do a super super deep dive on how different the regions are in England alone, and the type of
I
player
actually
you
have a
become
I have a
because of that
great place
academy.
to go from here. Great place to go from here. Let's go right to Messi and Ronaldo because they represent perfectly what we're talking about. Um, as kind of I Ronaldo is Portuguese and he went to a Portugal club, but he is from Madeira or Madi. I don't know how you say it, but
Madeira.
it's basically 600 miles from the Portugal mainland. So he did have to travel a significant distance without his family. Messi traveled to Barcelona from Argentina with his family, but still vast areas that you have to travel at a very young age. They were both picked up before they were considered teenagers. So with Messi going to Barcelona to La Masia, their academy so prolific it has its own like name, which is rare. Um, if you go to Barcelona's academy, they're molding you to be a Barcelona player now and forever. With the Portuguese academies, they know they're not going to hold on to Ronaldo his whole career. So they're molding him to be the most prolific player in the quickest amount of time possible. And they absolutely succeeded that. And Barcelona, if they had the funds, would have absolutely succeeded with Messi as well. But the it just wraps up perfectly what you were saying about where you go. Um, there's overlying kind of powers that control that and control where you go from there, or if you go anywhere from there, or what you learn there. Are you handicapped if you go to Barcelona's academy because you might not fit in Italy after that because you've been drilled so tactically in the Spanish way versus everywhere else? Um, and Messi was 8 when he went to Barcelona. 8. He was under. So he actually has a growth um, disorder that required thousands of dollars a month in hospital bills, which Barcelona obviously paid. But he was picked on when he went to Spain. The dialect was different. I just couldn't imagine doing that, you know? Couldn't imagine it, which is where I'm like, okay, maybe the high school to college to pro route isn't that bad, but it's just such a better story. Like most things with soccer, it just creates a better story, right?
But like
Um,
the whole concept of uprooting your whole life over
mhm.
an 8 year old is just wild. But like it pays off at times. like obviously it certainly did for Messi. He became the greatest footballer probably of all time because his family made that decision to uproot him, and Barcelona put those funds in place to develop him physically and health wise. So it is so important to identify a club at such a young age as a parent that will give your child everything that they need to be successful, and doing that at such a young age is crazy. Or if you're, like
Mhm.
you said, Ronaldo, having to be a whole flight across half an ocean because you grew up on an island in Portugal. It's just it's so crazy, just the concept of it. And in America, it's so foreign. Like kids struggle, like you see kids hit the transfer portal in the NCAA because they're too far from home after 1 year at 18, and these kids are
Yeah.
doing it at 9, 10, 11. And that whole concept is pretty incredible.
Yeah, and it lends to, I think, the more I think about it, the more I'm like, why don't the rich clubs just go buy all the best prodigies out there? Because like theoretically you could, but then it's like, okay, maybe these kids, they know the uncertainty of them buying them, and they just kind of become like nuisances almost. It's like, yeah, we got to
Lost in
attend
the
to our academy.
system.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it they can be within your control, but they're these people aren't stupid that are running these clubs. Like they know that an 8-year old who's the best in the world at 8 years old isn't guaranteed to even make top flight football in a country anywhere.
So how
Um,
much money do you really want to sink into a 12
yeah.
year old? Like, do I really want to pay for their parents to move here from Brazil or
Mhm.
Argentina or the United States to come live with us, and give this 12-year-old, two parents worth of salary so they can survive in living in this country? Or
And
do we make
multiply
them come
that by however many kids you have in your
kids, right?
academy,
Or do you say, sorry family, you can't come? But then is that really in the player's best interest because they are so far from
Would
home, and
Messi have
and
been
are
the player he was
right?
today if
Yeah. Would
Barcelona had said
Messi
no?
have mentally survived, like you said, because he was so small and undersized, and that, like, getting picked on? Would he have gotten through that if his family wasn't there? So it is wild just to think about how much money is spent on making these 10, 11, 12 year olds feel comfortable in your system and in your
Yeah.
city, and in your academy, and the long-term investment it is, because it's not a 2 or 3 year investment. It is a 10-year
10 year.
investment until you see
Mhm.
your money back, even whether it's
Yeah.
on the field or from transfer value. Like
You're
it's a
paying
10
a
year
mortgage with interest for a player,
for a
basically.
long, long time, and you're hoping it hits. And for every Messi that did hit, how many other players did they bring in that same year at Barcelona that didn't hit?
Statistically,
And
probably 99.
right, so like if you think about how much money they had to spend on Messi times 50, and they got their money's worth on Messi, but they lost money everywhere else. That, I think, is what kind of hinders the thought of, let's get every child prodigy we can in our
Yeah.
system. And I think that probably, I don't know for a fact because I don't do a deep dive on the finances of Spanish soccer, but that is likely part of Barcelona's financial problems. Is they've had to sink so
I would
much
not
money
be
into the
surprised.
academy to get the Messis of the world, that they're not quite seeing that same return. So if
Yeah.
you're a mid financially mid table financially club, is it really worth trying to go get this young kid, or should we just buy people for $40 million 10 years from now and not have sunk 50 million on five of them, and only one hits 10 years down the road? I think
Yeah, it'd
that's
be
where you
interesting to
kind
see
of have
that
to find that
breakdown
balance.
of what does it cost to like keep an academy player for 8 years, and say you buy him for 45 million. Like, do you save money at that point? I wonder
Right.
where that line is
That
for
break even is
certain price ranges. Yeah. Um, it is a big topic. It's a really big topic, and there's multiple different rabbit holes that you can run down. But Dylan, let's move to the elephant in the room. It's the thing that Americans love to talk about. Um, if our best athletes played soccer, would we be the best in the world?
yes.
Yes, absolutely, we would. Why wouldn't
Yes.
we? But
Tyreek Hill on the
that's
wing,
impossible.
LeBron
It
in the
will never.
box.
Yeah, it will never happen. It is culturally, geographically, economically impossible, socially impossible. So just let's get that out of our minds. Like, we can't dominate at everything. There will be, opportunity costs if you want to do that. Like, where the Super Bowl would be nothing, where the NBA Finals would be nothing. You'd have to sacrifice a lot to have everybody in one of the largest countries in the world to focus on one sport. And that plays to geography a lot, which I mentioned. Dylan, you said something a few days ago, actually, highlighting like the stereotypes of different regions athletes in America. Will you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, like stereotype, like again, super generalization here, but like Midwest is kind of that nitty. Like if I had to pick a position for the regions in America
mhm.
in soccer, I'd say Midwest would be like your center backs,
Yeah,
and your wingers would come from the Southwest, like the Arizonas, the Southern Californias, and
Georgia,
your
let's say Southeast also.
yeah, you get some of like
Speed.
Florida. There's a lot of speed. Georgia,
Yeah.
there's a lot of speed. And then you look at the East
Texas, where
Coast.
you're holding midfielder,
Yep, and your attacking midfielders are probably the Northeast, like that New England. Very tactical, very
Just always
pro-
operated in tight spaces their whole life. New York
progressive. Yeah,
City. Yeah.
you're used to living in New York, so like I got to think quick. I'm running around trying to get to work via the subway or school
Mhm.
via the subway, and I gotta navigate that. That's exactly what you want from a number 10, like working through the midfield and attacking. And you know your again, your speed is coming from a lot of the southern states where you can be outside running a lot, and the grittiness is like that steel city, Pittsburgh, Iowa, like that grittiness coming from the
Yeah.
Midwest. And that's something that's kind of cool about the US. You can kind of see that in the national team at times. Those stereotypes kind of come into light, and I think that it is a cool and unique thing about American sports, especially the potential for soccer. But then again, coming back to there is just now being a centralized academy location, and is a kid from Iowa going
And
to
it's
really
not
want to go?
centralized at all
We're trying to
geographically.
right, yeah, it's in
Yeah.
yeah, it's in Georgia, so we're talking like again a 4-hour flight from Southern California to go train at 12 or 13. And right now America's still trying to balance that normalization of childhood, and they're not asking kids to move there full time. But I think if we really do want to compete on the level internationally that I think we all do, we will start to have to ask that of children. And again, becoming a parent in the near future, it's that's a difficult thing to wrap your mind around.
Mhm.
Sending your 10, 11, 12-year old off to Atlanta for, even if it's just the summer, 3 months away. If you're in Seattle, like, do you really want your kid going that far away? And I think that's where we're kind of hindered. We do have some stereotypes positionally that I think are advantageous. I think especially that grittiness in the Midwest can be utilized, but centralizing it and making it fluid, especially on the pitch, is a lot more difficult in the U.S. because of those geographical limitations that we have.
Yeah, looking at the international level, if you look at every World Cup champion there's ever been, they either have a centralized academy that's well known for specific things. It's ingrained in their country soccer DNA, or you have a country like Brazil that has such a cultural aspect to it, the samba, the Latin, the flair, that they create just naturally a certain type of player that in a certain era just dominated everybody else because nobody else could play like that, because nobody else could move their hips like that or move their feet like that. Literally, it was like dance on a field.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in America, we're never going to win the World Cup with players coming back from Scotland and then England and MLS. It's just so decentralized. You can never have an identity in that. And I think to win in sports, you have to have an identity. Tottenham has seen it tenfold this year with Ange Postecoglou when he's brought an identity. Everybody just feels better. You might not even win, but it feels better, and you always feel like you're closer than when you're decentralized and you don't have an identity. So speaking at the international level, a centralized academy is a first step, but I don't think you're ever going to get that commitment nationwide in order to develop that
And
American
I
identity.
think a big part of that is the league. Like
Mhm.
I
The
just
league is
don't
a big
think
hindrance.
the MLS, like, that isn't your goal, is to play MLS. You grow up in Germany, your goal is to go play for Bayern. There's no American that goes, oh man, I really want to go play for insert MLS, the Sounders. Like, you might if you
If
grew
you're
up in
listening
Seattle.
and you did have that dream, good for you,
Let
though.
us know.
Yeah.
Let us know, and good for you. Like, it would be very local though. Like, if you grow up in Seattle or Kansas City and you have a very good, fun professional team, you're like, oh, I want to play there someday. But it's not a nationwide thing. In England,
Mhm.
so many kids probably grow up wanting to be a Manchester United player or an Arsenal player or a Spurs player, or in Spain a Barcelona or Madrid player, and that is their main goal and their main focus. And in America, the main goal and focus is get the hell out of America. And not because America's a bad place to live, but from a soccer perspective, it's a terrible place to play.
It's a
And I think
purgatory
that kind of speaks to
and a
that lack of
retirement home.
identity and retirement home. It kind of speaks to the lack of identity in American soccer. And I think it's one thing that if the U.S. is going to be successful on an international scale, we have to kind of embrace that and want players to pick up things from other countries. And I think it can be super beneficial. Like, I think Anthony Robinson playing for Fulham is a perfect fit right now. He's getting to kind of grind
Oh,
out.
really? He's rivaling team of the season. I would say it's a pretty damn good fit right now.
Like,
Finally putting it all together, Anthony.
but
Anthony.
he's grinding
Shit,
out
it's about time.
He's grinding out in the Premier League, and that's what it's going to take to be successful on an international scale as an American. We're going to have to grind out a semifinal. We're never going to get to a semifinal because we're the best one of the four best teams in the world. That will never ever happen. So you kind of want that from an American perspective, but I think it will get us to a point where we are competing. But like you said, I don't think we'll ever get to a point where we can win a World Cup because we just don't have that national identity. So we're kind of a little bit in purgatory in American soccer because of that. Player development is outsourced because we aren't never going to have a league that is competing with the top 3 or 4 leagues in the world. We're always going to have to ship our best players out. And like you said, they're going to have to come home for the international break and train for 2 weeks together and find a way to gel really quick, rather than a Spanish team where
with a 6-hour time difference.
Yeah, right. Where 75% of your players in Spain or England are playing in the same league together, playing the same type of football, granted in different systems.
A lot of times only in 2 different cities, like not even spread around the country.
Right.
Like they're in Barcelona or they're in Madrid.
And then you just pop over, you just pop over in your international break, and half the guys on your team in your national camp are on one of those 2 teams, and you're all playing a very similar type of soccer.
I have to mention zonal marking here. Great book. When it talks about Spain, it basically talks about the big countries in soccer and how they transitioned from success from one to another and what that took. Spain's 2010 World Cup team, every player in the starting 11 except for 2 were Barcelona players. The entire midfield and everybody on the front line except for Messi was Spanish. Crazy.
And that's just something Neymar came. Like we as Americans get mad when we see MLS players on the roster. Like, we get frustrated. So we just don't have that same type of identity. And I think there are positives to getting a lot of different influence. You learn to play different ways against different people, and that can be beneficial. But as far as actually winning international trophies, it's a huge hindrance for us because it is so not centralized and not same thought process, same play style, because we are having guys in Bundesliga, Eredivisie, and Premier League, and just scattered throughout the world.
You might be able to bring insights on how to grind out a win, but you're not going to be able to play your way and beat those countries
and dominate playing your style like Spain and Germany and England are able to do. Exactly.
Yeah. Good stuff. I think, obviously towards the end we transition to Europe as a whole, but you have to, and that's where we're going to go eventually. We've got a few more episodes recapping some big topics that come from the English pyramid. The biggest one left being promotion relegation. We're going to talk cup competitions because those can just really muddy the waters for you as a new soccer fan. It can get really confusing. Dylan's a big cup competition guy. He loves his cups.
Big Mickey Mouse Cup guy.
Yeah. And then maybe one or two more if we look back on our interview with Travis and want to hit on something else. But let us know if you guys have any questions on academies in the comments. I'm sure you do. I still do. I'm hoping to learn a lot from our interview with Tottenham's former academy player. And maybe we can revisit this in 6 months' time or something, Dylan. And I can tell you what those guys do for school, because I still want to know if these kids get educated.
And go check out our rise, death, and rebirth episode on academies, because it's not the first time we've dove into academies. We talked about the Ajax Academy in the past and the Porto Academy in the past, and like that's a really, really good episode if you are looking for a little bit more info, a little bit more specific, deeper dive, less so on the comparison.
Let's put the link down below, Dylan. Can we commit to doing that?
We'll throw the link in there in the description. Go check that out, because it does give a little bit deeper dive on where academies were 20 years ago, where they are now, and where we kind of see them going in the future. Because it is there is some ebbs and flows there, and it has changed a bit over time. But I do think it's a huge part of specifically European success on an international level.
Yep. Guys, we encourage you to like, comment, subscribe, all that, get involved in the conversation. Our goal for this kind of transition of content was to be more conversational, talk from a more unique perspective, and we want y'all to be involved, other than just you being a guest on the show. If you want to do that, get involved in the comments. We will, if we get comments, we will talk about them on the show. We promise. We want the comments. So we appreciate y'all watching, listening, as always, whatever you're doing. Have a good rest of your weekend, and we'll talk to y'all later.